Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Kiwi Talks. I'm speaking to the big cheese of the Armageddon Expo. Bill Geradts, how are you doing?
Doing really well.
There's a million questions I want to ask you, so I'll just start off with how did this all come about with the Expo?
I've repeated this story a few times. So it's, but essentially, I used to run Doctor Who video days.
Yeah.
And it was a way of me paying for videotapes from the Who shop in England, getting them sent over, and then I'd screen them and a couple other things and paid for my Doctor Who habit. And then, again, I really wish I could remember this guy's name. He was in a store in Panmure, and it was in the heyday of the trading card boom. And he said, you should do a show. And there'd been an event called Icons that had run in 93 and 94. And it was more comic-based. And it didn't come back. And we thought, okay, we could do something. So we started from there. It's just one of those, you should do this kind of things. And my experience is that there's a lot of people that want stuff to happen, not many that will do stuff to make it happen.
Yeah.
Certainly not at a grander level. So, and I tend to be more of a jump before I look kind of guy sometimes, which it hurts me a lot and helps me in others, but it also gets stuff done. So,
did you always foresee that it would become the thing that it did?
No, not at all. I'm still a little surprised, and I was trying to think. Excuse me. I was trying to think if there was a moment when it became when it became a job. I remember. I mean, I've been working on this full time for about 17 years now. It was about 2003, 2004 ish when I made the move from working and doing this part time to doing this full time, and but I don't remember at that point thinking that this was a long-term thing.
Right.
And it's only recently that I'm sort of, I don't know. I mean, it's been 25 years, so I figure it has been a long-term thing. I'm not thinking about the end of it, but I'm nearly 50. I'm 49. I'll be 50 next year. And I'm starting to think a little bit, what's going to be, am I going to be 60 doing this thing? Do I want to be 60 doing this thing? And should I be 60 doing this thing? Because I'm surrounding myself, a lot of my staff are in the 20s and 30s. And I try to listen to what other people are doing because to a degree, I feel like I'm starting to age out of what I need to do in some respects.
Yeah, well,
I'm doing. I feel like I'm still right there. I'm just, starting to think that way. But I figure I'm 5 to 10 years away from really thinking about that properly. So,
do you have a successor in place, or are you molding someone to be your successor?
No, not really. I mean, I know I've got a few of my kids that are sort of involved with the show. So there's always possibilities there.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know. That's one of those things where when's the point you step back from something or something you've invested your entire life into? And there's not many people that can do that. I mean, most things that most projects when you're involved with it's a job. You move from one job to another, and yes, it's something you remember, but it's not something that you necessarily hang on to as the be all and end all. This is me and the wife call this like our fifth child. So I don't know that I could separate myself from it, even if I decided I wanted to. That might be too hard to do.
Yeah. Well, I view you as like the Vince McMahon of the convention, the big convention thing in New Zealand. So you're the guy.
Oh, probably because I am. I mean, that's not an inaccurate description.
No.
The thing is, when there's a few little things that are popping up now, and it's been interesting because, I mean, like Overload or Doge and Overload's been around for a few years. I want to say over 10 years. But it's only in the last 3 or 4 that I've really started seeing smaller little events popping up. Or, I mean, I'm sure they've been around, but I haven't been seeing them. Now I'm starting to notice a few. And they're generally more fan-driven, more smaller, and more, I don't think niche is the right word, but very specific in their audience they're trying to get. And normally the reason that it hasn't happened is because people just don't get off their ass and do it. And I've had certainly... We get our detractors because I think there's this, amongst some people's thought, there's this thought that we're a corporate thing. Whereas they couldn't be further from the truth, because there's up until 6 years ago, there was 2 people working on this show. So,
wow.
Yeah. Whereas now I've got about 5, 3, 4, 6, now there's 7 people working on it. And that's more of an expansion into, hiring a full-time graphic designer, hiring a full-time communications person. Just as roles expanded, like about 2015, 2016, they brought in new health and safety laws, and that takes up a lot of time. So having somebody dedicated to that was a bit shifts. But up until 2014, we did not have any full-time employees. So we've been one step above a fan event for a number of years, but people seem to think of us as being this big thing. And but at our heart, I'm just somebody who gets off my ass and does it. And it is good to see more people doing that. But the Vince McMahon analogy is not wrong. I mean, I know a couple of guys that fit that description in Australia. I know most of the guys in England and a few of the guys in America as well. So we're certainly connected internationally. And seeing those other shows, it gives me a good perspective of New Zealand as well. So
yeah, but I think it's a compliment to you then if people think that you're a corporate, because it's a massive, massive undertaking. I mean, I've gone to the events quite a few times, and they look like there's a big team involved of like 30 to 50 people.
There's certainly, I mean, at the show itself, there's about between 30 to 100 staff. Yeah. So the show itself is quite large.
Of course.
But it's, I mean, every year is different. This year has been very different. And the regional shows, the Wellington, Christchurch and Tauranga that we do are very different to the Auckland one. And then always have been for quite some time. They're, because they have to be. I mean, Auckland, we get a bit of people that are always a bit shitty about Auckland having the bigger guests or Auckland having this bigger thing. And it's essentially where the money is.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah. But you're always going to get people that complain anyway. Doesn't matter what you do.
Oh, no, I get that. We once did a thing where on social media, there's this constant thing that you'll see. You announce a guest, and one of the comments will be, why does Auckland get all the good guests? Why doesn't Wellington get all the good guests? Or I know there's a couple of things. That's the main one, right? But if you go on to the UK shows, if you go on to the Australian shows, you see exactly the same post. Why does Sydney get all the good guests and not Melbourne? Why does Blackpool get all the great guests and not Manchester? It's funny that it's such a consistent complaint. But it's one that we don't tend to take too seriously anymore because, a lot of the times, celebrity-wise, it's purely been random, chance, who's available, who contacts us, who says yes, who says no,
So how do you actually get people on? Like, how do you decide who the guest list is going to be?
I historically will talk to a bunch of different agents. There's about 3 or 4 main ones, but there's at least a dozen that I deal with internationally. I mean, we've been doing this long enough that my reach is quite broad. Some people contact us and say, oh, this guy wants to come to New Zealand. And sometimes it's this person's already in the country, which doesn't happen very often, but, and then we'll go through the names, say that, and some names will just pop out, and sometimes it works really well, and other times it just doesn't work at all. And it's I don't know. I'd like to say there's a plan to it, but there really isn't. It purely comes down to who's available. I mean, the virtual stuff we're doing this year, because we can't fly people in, has actually been very rewarding, because there's been a number of guests that I've wanted to have at the show that we could just never get, or they couldn't travel, or they were filming, or anything along those lines. And doing it virtually means we can take an hour out of the time and away they go. So,
So how hard was it to plan for this year, given COVID? I mean, you must have been hit with like this massive avalanche as soon as, the first lockdown happened.
Well, one of the things I've said about this year is that we did each show 3 times. And we planned them out originally. We went into lockdown, so we planned them for under specific rules or stuff like that. And then when lockdown finished, we had to replan them again. So it was, I tend to not dwell on stuff. I knew that once the seriousness of what was happening popped in, we knew pretty quickly what we were going to have to do. And my original thought was that we just wouldn't be able to have any physical guests or guests at all. And then Zoom became a big thing, because I mean, I'd even heard of Zoom before COVID hit. And then that opened up options. So we followed that. And we're looking at doing different stuff next year to follow it up. But it has opened up a lot of additional avenues that we wouldn't have had before. So in a way, it's not been a terrible thing.
Right. So could at some point you kind of adapt the old model with elements of the new model?
Oh, that's definitely the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, we never, the thing I have with you have before COVID, you have COVID, and you have after COVID. Now there's this delusion, because nobody's really talking about it, that after COVID is going to be the same as before COVID.
Yeah, it won't.
And it's not. The whole world is going to be different. And there's what that's going to be. Nobody really seems to know right now, or like when it's going to be. I mean, we're planning the first 3 shows next year to be like the same shows this year, because for the first half of the year, we know most things aren't going to be different. I'm hoping it'll be a little easier, that the vaccine will be starting to come out, that think that'll open up a few things for us. And with Auckland, we might have a couple of physical guests. That's our hope. But I'm thinking, quite frankly, 2022, that we'll have definitely more virtual than physical.
Well, it makes sense. Yeah. So I suppose if you were to get guests, would it be from countries that have probably contained COVID more, like say Australia, as opposed to America?
No, I think that we'll get to a point there where if you want to come to New Zealand, you can come, but you've got to be vaccinated. And you'll have a special stamp on your passport. Says, you want to travel somewhere? Sure. You vaccinated? You got this particular one? Sure, away you go. And I think New Zealand will be number 1 for that, because essentially our biggest problem is our border. The minute you fix that problem, it's not a problem at all. The Pakistani cricket team wants to get here? No problems. All vaccinated? Sure, get on a plane. There you go. Not vaccinated? Tough shit.
So
that's how I see it going.
Whether it does or not. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I figure that's as I said, I'm planning for what we did this year we're doing some virtual signings where we're going to get some guests to pre-sign some stuff and then have them Zoom in and talk to people while we give out autographs for some of the animation guests. And that's something we didn't do this year. We're expanding some of the gaming stuff. But then we get to Auckland, as I said, I'm hoping to have a few physical, bigger guests present. But that'll also depend on who wants to travel. Will the airfares be the same? Will they triple in price because there's not as many flying? Will they be cheaper because they want people to fly? Will business class go through the roof? I mean, that's all stuff. And that affects it, because if you're paying 10 grand for a business class flight, that's one thing. But if you're paying 30, that's another.
Yeah, well, that's right.
I mean, these are factors, because, I mean, Stephen Amell doesn't get on a plane in economy. He comes business class. That's a given. So you have to sort of work the budgets to make that work. So,
and I suppose a lot of these guests that do come over, they stay overnight, and you have to give them accommodation and stuff.
Normally a minimum of 5 days. Some stay longer. I've had guests stay for 2 weeks, a month sometimes. with Auckland, sometimes they've gone to Australia. But generally, I mean, that's the thing. Coming to New Zealand for a convention is a week-long commitment.
Mm.
It's not something that they're just doing. It is 12 hours to fly here, or 24 hours if you're in England. You've got to get here. You got a 3-day show. You got a half day coming back. So minimum, it's 4.5 days. So to do it and keep your sanity, most people are here for about 5. So it's about 5 to 6 days at least.
Yeah, makes sense. And given the jet lag and everything, it probably takes that amount of time to get used to it. So yeah, it makes sense. So with obviously things like the PS5 and the Xbox now out, do you cater to make that kind of at the forefront going forward?
Well, one of the biggest downsides we had this year was that pretty much all of the corporates just said, we're not doing anything. And I can't, it was a little irksome, but I couldn't blame them. You know, I mean, as a corporate, they were pretty much being told, in America, we can't do anything, so in New Zealand, you can't do anything. And that was everybody. That was every big brand we dealt with. And it meant that we couldn't do the PlayStation or the Xbox promotions that we would have liked to have done. But, you know, it's a different world, so you roll with it. I would hope that we'll have a proper presence next year. But that's far enough away that I'm not really... You know, they couldn't tell me even if I asked now, and it's far enough away that I just don't know. Yeah.
Because what's the most popular thing at those conventions? Is it the gaming? Is it the anime? Is it the wrestling?
Well, see, now that's the thing. Is look, I'm an old school Doctor Who fan, and I've had a philosophy for what these events are and what they do that stayed with me, and nothing I've seen has changed my mind on this one. So it's if you run an esports event, you were catering to esports fans. You were not getting people who are non-esports fans involved in this thing, generally. If you run a Doctor Who event, you're getting Doctor Who fans. You're not getting new Doctor Who fans or people who've never heard of Doctor Who walk up, go, oh, what's this? I'll check it out. Singular events are great for the area they're covering, but they do very little to grow an area. They're feeding themselves. They're a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's cannibalization of the audience. It's the same thing over and over again. And that's the same with everything. If you're doing, you can get new people brought into it, but whether the event itself is creating that audience or whether those people are just looking for it automatically. Now, what we try to do is we do like gaming and animation and comics and collectibles and music and celebrities and movies and all these kind of things. And the idea is that I'm interested in A. I come to the show to see A. I'm exposed to B. I like B. I'm going to start looking into that. And that's how you expand things. Like I came for the celebrity guest. I watched this anime while I was there. I'm going to start watching anime. And it's how you grow. You go to an anime show, you've got nothing but anime fans, and they're spending money and cannibalizing, but is it actually helping the industry grow? In my opinion, it's not. Not events that way. I mean, there is a little bit of that, but not enough. Whereas the most pop culture events, and Armageddon's a bit more diverse than most. We have a bit more gaming and other things because New Zealand-wise we have to be. But most pop culture events like New York Comic Con, C2E2, Supernova, Oz Comic Con, us, a bunch of others, there's enough diversity there that people are coming for one reason or maybe multiple reasons, but are getting exposed to other things and expanding into those areas. So it's not a cannibalization of one audience, it's spreading the audience around a bit more.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But do you...
So, I mean, and that's not to say, look, I went to the Doctor Who 50th anniversary thing in London, and I had a freaking blast. And those shows are great. It's not to say not to do them, but I think you have to look at why you're doing it and the reasoning and what you're expecting to get out of it. And if you're just looking to entertain your fan club or your audience, then that's all the reason you need. That's enough to do it. But if you're looking to grow something, then you have to do something beyond that.
So I suppose every year when you were looking at the statistics after every event, were you seeing it kind of go up like this, I suppose?
It depends. It's certainly, it's also venue, it's also capacity. Like when we were at the Aotea Centre from like 2004 to 2008, numbers stayed pretty consistent every year. Wellington was the same, and then we moved to venues. As we move venues, we expand areas, we start seeing an increase. And certainly Auckland stabilised in the last few years. But when we do surveys, there's always a good 30-40% of the people that haven't been to the show or didn't go the year before. So we're always seeing a new, fresh thing. And we're at that point, we've been around long enough that you've seen the parents bringing their kids in who were kids when their parents brought them in. So, there's some advantages to being a legacy event now instead of starting up new and trying to tell people what we are by creating a name or something. So
Yeah. So how long does it actually take you to organise one event? So let's take Auckland, for example. So obviously before the event, because usually it's in September, October?
It's October, it's Labour weekend. Look, I normally say a year.
A year. So you plan it out a year what we do in advance.
Yeah, it's the 6 months worth of planning and dealing with the bigger companies and starting to lay things out, and then 6 months worth of doing. And then while we're doing, we're planning the regional shows. So we're like right at the moment, I'm selling Christchurch, Tauranga, and Wellington, but I'm planning for Auckland and I'm dealing with companies and working towards that. So, and then once we finish the regional shows or nearly finish them, we'll switch over to doing Auckland actively and I'll start planning the regional shows. And then as soon as we finish Auckland, we're constant movable feast. And sometimes stuff happens that we get something penciled in a year to 2 years in advance. Doesn't happen often, but with COVID, I'm working on some things for Auckland next year, but we're probably a little slower than what we were. Again, we're adapting to that, and I think we're adapting pretty well because I know some events that just don't know what the hell they're doing. So,
how do you get any free time though? Because this sounds like an insane workload.
No, it's not as bad as that. I tend to have I wouldn't say cruisy days, but I tend to have pretty flexible days. But I also start early and finish late. So I tend to pace myself. It's more of it's a marathon, not a sprint. There are days when you feel like you're sprinting, but most of the time I'm just jogging at a leisurely pace getting there. And I can bugger out for an hour or I can do something else or, whatever. But it's always there. I'm always involved in this. This is not a thing that I park and I can just leave for a week without checking in on. I mean, even when I'm on holiday, I'm pretty much doing stuff.
Oh, right. Okay. So you haven't stopped at all in the last 20, 25 years? Just kept going?
Oh, well, it depends what your definition of stop is. I mean, I've gone to Comic-Con about 8 times. I mean, that's work, but it's fun. So I've only had 1 or 2 real holidays, but I've had a lot of trips that I've worked around the show itself. Like I went to Japan a few years back, and we went to Anime Japan as part of the reason we went. And it was good to see a different kind of anime show. It was very different to what I was expecting. But we spent the rest of the week wandering around Japan. So
Does all this stuff inspire you though? You must go to these events like E3.
It's why you want to go to them.
Yeah.
That's the point of doing them. There's always things. Like I remember going to Comic-Con in 2001 and 2000, and I bumped into the voices of Dragon Ball Z while I was there, and we ended up getting them to come to the show. And I wouldn't have had that without being there for that. And there's people I meet into and contacts, and the shows in London have been pretty rewarding because I get a lot of actors or talent from there, and I know the guys, so I'm behind the scenes a lot. And it's once you know how the the sausage is made, it's very hard to not to go to the front of the shop. It's much better to stay in the factory. So
yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, as I said, I'm very lucky. I'm very happy with the position I'm in. I've had a great time doing it, and I still am. But I've got to do things that any fanboy would have killed for. So
yeah. Well, it looks like the dream job to me. From the outside looking in, that is.
From the outside, it is. It's the problem is you just can't step away from it. There are times when I'm not sleeping. There are times when it's still a business, and there is a lot of stuff we've done as fans that we shouldn't have done as business people, and that can be problematic. And one of the things that irks me a little is I've cut myself off from a lot of social media because I just deal with trolls or people who just have no idea, and I don't need to deal with them, so I just step back and went, you know what, I'm good without this. But I also know the level that we've gone to do things that any corporate would never have done. Like if we were a pure corporate, we'd have the Auckland show, and that would be the only show we'd do. We wouldn't be doing the regions at all. We never would have. We would have just done Auckland. That's where the money is. That's where we go. And yet we do 4 shows a year. So, it's just dealing with negativity when we're going out of our way to provide as much positivity that behind the scenes can be a little tiring sometimes.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's always people that are negative. Didn't you do?
I know. Again, that's why I just stopped engaging, which is more their loss than mine. So I just.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, social media is a cesspool of negativity. That's pretty much what it is. Yeah. Did you do 5 at one point? Because you used to have them in Hamilton as well, right?
We did We used to do Dunedin as well.
Oh, right.
We moved Hamilton we did 1 year in Manukau, and then we've been doing Tauranga.
Right.
We sort of stayed in that way. So we did Dunedin, and we just couldn't get it to. I mean, it's a hellishly expensive show to run, and Dunedin just wasn't. We were losing money more so than I was comfortable with. So.
Really?
And then historically, the further down the country you go, the less people want to spend money. I'd hate to go to Invercargill because, God, I think they'd want you to pay them to get in. And then when we were talking about it, I got slammed by these people who were like, pretty much assumed that we owed them a show and were resentful. And that. So when we made the decision to not come back, I actually commented and said, look, this wasn't the reason we're not coming back, but it definitely contributed towards it because I'm not doing this for you to shit on me and tell me I suck when that doesn't make me want to come to your house and help you. That just makes me want to tell you to get fucked.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
It wasn't the reason we stopped doing Dunedin, but it was definitely a contributing factor that there was a small group of people in Dunedin that felt like we owed them a living, and we didn't. So,
I think some people just don't understand how business works, or how it has to be somewhat viable. I think
the illusion is that we're rolling in a sack of cash after every show, and so it's an easy thing, and that's just not the case. It's just not the case. I mean, if we hadn't had the government's wage subsidy this year, we wouldn't have survived. Straight up. Wow. I mean, we would have. One of the options we were looking at was just hibernating, which would have been closing down completely, coming out next year, which is what a lot of events have done. And in the end, we decided to stick to it, and it was a hell of a risk, particularly the Auckland one, because there's a lot of costs you don't get back if you get canned. And we managed through it, but it wasn't easy. Yeah, and certainly after a year's worth of work, we've come out okay in the end. But I'm not Scrooge McDuck. I don't have my vault that I get to dive into every week. So,
because how long did it take before the expo started making a profit? Really? I mean, I imagine it wouldn't have been straight away, because usually with these things,
I know we made a loss. We made a loss last year.
Oh, really?
And we made profits. Yeah. Well, according to my accountant, we did. So, I know it's hit and miss. It's hit and miss. Again, it's if I was running this as a corporate thing, then this show would have been profitable 20 years ago. But but I'm not, and a lot of the stuff we do tends to float up and down a bit. So some years we do well, some years we don't. Some years we do very badly, and then we need to think. But normally the bad years are normally been preceded by something really good happening because we doubled down and tried to make the show bigger because I got bills to pay. So,
well, at least you're honest about it. So I suppose it's a bit of a seesaw between fan and business in terms of how
all the time. I mean, there's times when, I get contacted by in the past, I've been contacted by somebody and they go, would you like this guest? It's going to cost you this much. And we don't make the money, but I can't say, I'm going to get this guy. Like if David Tennant, his agent, called me up and he is not the cheapest guest in the world to host, I would find a way. I would be like, we're doing this. We will make this happen. But that's where you got to get creative and hope for the best. So
is there like one guest that you haven't gotten that you're like, I really want, but you still haven't managed to get?
There's certainly a few guests that I've worked years to get. And like John Barrowman took us years to get him. And it was very rewarding when we did. There's nobody I've actively worked on at the moment that I'm missing. As I said, Matt Smith and David Tennant are on my I want to get them list. But again, both of those guys just work and work and work and work. So getting them is easier said than done.
What about in terms of New Zealand guests who hold a lot of clout overseas, like say Peter Jackson or something?
Look, I've had Peter Jackson's kids come to my show.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a compliment in itself.
Yeah, but I've never had Peter Jackson turn up, and he certainly knows we exist.
Have you actually managed to get a hold of him? Because I know he's intensely private.
No, but he knows we exist. It's not the kind of guy you can phone up and say, you want to come to the show. There's a lovely delusion that that actors and to a degree, all actors really, they all want to say yes, they all want to come to the show. And I get people contacting us all the time saying, I went to this show in America and I talked to this guy and he'd really love to come to New Zealand. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure he would. But when I phone up his agent, they want $300,000 to make it happen. So it's just, there's always a business side. The second half of that conversation is how much.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to get, there's a few guests that we have been trying to get that are local guests, and they have not come to the show. And you can read into that what you will in terms of why, but you'd think doing the local event would be the easier choice, but they've done international shows, but we've never had them at the local show. And I've certainly knocked on the door a few times. Now, Peter Jackson, I haven't checked in with, quite frankly, but I haven't really been able to get hold of him. He knows where we are. I've had his people reach out to me for other things, but anytime we've made any minor overtures, it's pretty much just been dismissed. So,
I suppose it would be the same with someone like Israel Adesanya, who's obviously a huge anime fan, and he's a huge gamer fan as well. I'm not sure if you knew that or not.
I can't speak for everybody. I'm thinking, in terms of Kiwi guys, I'm thinking more bigger people who've been around a long time. But there's always, we get some great local talent. And we've had some that come to the show multiple times. And then there's times when it works in just perfectly. We had 11 of the 13 dwarfs from The Hobbit at one show once, and that was amazing. It was just at the right time, just at the right way, and it worked out perfectly. But historically, it doesn't happen. And not through lack of trying, generally.
Well, that's a good point that you make in terms of the business sense. I mean, I've talked to a couple of voice actors from Dragon Ball Z, Stephanie Nadolny, who I know you know. She's obviously got nothing but great things to say about the Armageddon Expo because she's been before. And like Linda Young was asking me, I really want to come. But I'm like, well, I'm not sure what's involved there in terms of like people talk to their people.
We're not it's 0 point talking to anybody about coming to New Zealand physically.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's always the kicker is that it's certainly a lot of there's lots of people that would love to come. there's always that conversation of how do we make it happen and how much does it cost? And sometimes it's really easy and sometimes it's really rewarding. And then other times I'm the guy who pays for the meal and gets stuck with a check. So it's trying to balance that out, and that can be interesting as well.
Can it be quite tiresome, though, trying to go back and forth with some of these people? I mean, I try and get guests on my show, and it can be really frustrating. I mean, either you don't get a reply or you're dealing with a in-between person that's just very difficult.
Well, I'm used to that. And sometimes it can take a lot of time. There's certain agents I deal with that just don't seem to... that you're getting, you open the doors and you're going to get 20 emails from them to think. And there's other people that I drop a line to and I'll get one email back saying, yep, it's all good, sorted. So it depends on who you're dealing with. I tend to deal with managers who know what they're doing. So, but I've also been doing this long enough that I can, cut through the shit and just get to it and say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the thing, you're available. And then you pencil it in and hope to confirm it.
So when you go to these events overseas, like E3 or Evo or Comic-Con or whatever, I suppose you just try and find people and try and network? That's what you're trying to do?
No. Sometimes it's more interested in, I generally, if there's the odd actor that I really want to get, and I don't have a contact for, there's not a matter of saying, do you want to come to New Zealand? It's a matter of, who's the best person to talk to you about getting you here? And most of the time they'll say a name that I know, and then I'll drop that person a line. It's, again, the amount of times we get people saying, oh, I talked to Stan Lee and he'd really love to come to New Zealand. And you go, yeah, but that's what everybody's going to say when you ask them that question. Yeah. Would you like to come to New Zealand is not a hard question. It's what follows next that's the problem.
Do you think, because New Zealand seems to be getting a lot of media attention in the positive sense at the moment due to how we've handled COVID, do you think you can utilize that to your advantage?
I think there'll be a lot of people that want to get the hell out of America, yeah. But again, it's too early. It's 6 months from now before we're really going to even know. And who knows? I'd like to think that there's always been, it's New Zealand, people want to come here, but actors travel. I mean, they travel a lot. So it's a nice thing, but it's not as unique an experience as people seem to think it might be. Yeah.
So is there anything you haven't accomplished yet that you are still wanting to achieve in terms of its expansion? Maybe a particular area that Armageddon doesn't really cater to that you want them to cater to?
There's always something new. I mean, it's always technological. I mean, we're limited by the venues that we have in this country. If you go to Melbourne, and they've got the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition and Convention Centre, or Jeff's Shed as they call it, and it's got like 30 bays of 30 meters by 60 meters. With every 2 bays, there's a wall that's removable, and you can have a 500 meter by 60 meter event if you want there, or less, or more, or whatever. And in New Zealand, we don't have anything close to that, and it means that we have to work in with what events we have. I mean, like I just went through the Christchurch Convention Centre, the Nutsa Pai that's opening up next year, and it's gorgeous. I mean, it's got all the bells and whistles. It's the best venue probably in the country, but it's not big enough. And that's, we're always limiting what we can do here. And the new convention centre in Auckland that got damaged in the fire, from what I can tell, it's the same thing. It'll be a great venue, won't be big enough, not for what we should have here to make work. And that limits any kind of growth you could have as an event. No matter what we do. And we're the biggest event pretty much in the country. I mean, the only bigger events than us physically is the field day events, and that's because they use giant paddocks to do what they're doing. Every other venue is you're restrained by the venue itself.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. So if you had a magic wand or you weren't limited at all, then what would be the ideal scenario?
What, as an event or as
yes, because you say you have limitations. Like, what are some of the limitations?
If we had a bigger venue, I just think that we would be able to get bigger companies with more international things would come in. It's like when Vector Arena or Spark Arena or whatever they're calling it now opened up in Auckland. Minute that opened up, you started seeing a lot more big music acts appearing in New Zealand because they could sell a 16,000, 20,000 concert instead of an 8,000 concert, and makes a difference. The minute you have more room to play with, people start, expanding. I mean, as I said, I'd like to run a big Doctor Who thing because I think there's the audience for it. As a show, there's always new stuff that we want to sort of try, but half the time it's more what's available this year. We're exploring some more VR stuff because that's starting to become more of a thing. But there's also, new TV shows or new experiences that open up the doors. And there's stuff that we wanted to do this year that I thought we had a good shot at, and we just got turned down flat. And and that's very irritating, but it doesn't stop us trying. So,
yeah, makes sense. But you must know a lot of people, so you must talk to business people and politicians and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And say your piece.
There's always more people to know. And it depends on, again, once COVID hit, everybody went into freeze mode. All the big corporations just froze everything. And that's starting to thaw out now. So that's helpful. Where that will go will be interesting to see.
I do find it interesting that you said before that those big corporate companies, if it's not happening in America, they won't do it elsewhere. I find that really weird. No,
it's because we're not, as a country, most of our corporates are based in Australia. Most of the Australian ones answer to America or Europe. It's the illusion that New Zealand, the companies get to say what happens in New Zealand is just that. It's all the supermarkets are owned by Aussies. All of the chains are owned by Aussies or Americans. I mean, we're not a country that has a lot of internal ownership in the big way when you really look at it. So a lot of those decisions aren't coming from here.
So has there been any investors overseas that have wanted to buy out Armageddon?
Not at the moment. I had one company that at least said, if you're interested, I'd be interested. But that was a few years ago, and I didn't really explore it and just did, I think at the time I said, look, I'll take a ridiculous amount of money that the company's not worth for it. But that was about as far as I let it there. So
yeah. So at some point, are you just? Do you ever have your days where you just think like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to go more corporate and not worry and do the fan stuff?
No. I've had days where I just like, what am I doing? This year has had a few of those where we're just going, are we going to be able to pull this off? Is this going to happen? I have to say this has been probably one of the most stressful years I've had, and I've had a lot of ups and downs over the years. But we came out of it okay. So, in the end, the stress is worth it. But no, I never, there's the odd time we've made a corporate decision, but normally that's based around we were trying to do something fan related or we had it in the works and then the numbers just were really, the scale was in the wrong direction. And if we'd done it, it would just cost us 50 grand or 100 grand or something like that. And the people, as I said, the biggest problem we have is that people want caviar, but they only want to pay for chips. So, it makes it a little hard to do some things, and sometimes we can, and we have. I mean, I'm very happy with what we've achieved over the years. But I also know, I know that if we weren't here, I don't know there would be an event like this in the country.
Or I don't think there would be.
Is my thinking. I think there'd be people that would try it, but I don't know that there would be people that would succeed. We've been doing this a long time. We've really built it up, but there's that level of randomness and luck that we've had, and I don't know that we could keep that going if we weren't doing it.
No, well, I
I
don't.
could be totally wrong. Somebody else could take this over or start another thing and do it 10 times better than me. So, that's entirely possible.
I don't think so. I mean, I go back to that Vince McMahon.
I'd like to not think so either, but it's anything's possible. I mean, that's the kicker is anything's possible. And, I certainly enjoy going to other shows. But I also enjoy going to mine. So.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, I haven't been every year, but every year that I've gone, it looks like the whole event runs like clockwork. I don't know if it does behind the scenes or if there's any drama, but it seems to be.
It's a clock that skips a few minutes sometimes, but generally it does. It's a year's worth of planning, so it's not something that we just whack together and say, let's do this. But there's a lot of ups and downs. But generally, once we get in the door, it tends to run pretty well.
Yeah. I suppose what I mean is like, how sometimes with these events, there can be curveballs. I mean, I'm like a musician and I've performed and then on the night something breaks or some sound equipment doesn't work. I mean, in terms of those sort of things.
Yeah. We've had a guest that broke his hand and foot at one point. I had people who one person was getting on the plane and couldn't make it, had a medical issue, had to get off the plane. So we've had guests that have done a show in Australia and we're all set for them to be in New Zealand the following weekend and they got a job and had to fly back. There's always stuff that happens. Where I don't tend to deal with that kind of thing negatively. It's a pain in the butt, but something happens, you accept it, you move on. And that's the only way to do it. And the people who wander around cursing the gods for being problems for them are the ones who just can't get that shit done. I tend to be very much a right or wrong, left or right, up or down kind of guy. It's you can't go right, okay, I'm going left, and away I go.
You seem to get quite a few sponsors, though. Was that always the hardest thing?
Well, that also helps. We're a big show. So, I mean, I think that as from a corporate thing, they should sponsor us. I think that there's not a lot of events that do, they get the coverage that we do. And we're also consistent. I mean, I've seen a few shows. There was a show in Auckland not too long ago, and their social media stopped halfway through the show, and they haven't posted anything in a month or so since. And whereas we're on every day, we're constantly active. So, I mean, that's all part of the event. It's all part of the thing people are paying for. So when you go to a corporate and you say, we have this engagement and we have these events, they're looking at multiple things. They're not just looking at a physical event. They're looking at all of the stuff that goes around it. And that's where getting them on board, helps.
Yeah. So how do you manage, like, let's say if you've got a gaming rig set up and you've got, I don't know, like 8 computers or something, or 8 consoles for like Call of Duty, how do you know that that's the number you're going to come to and you're going to have 8 consoles instead of 12 or 16 or...
Well, I'm not setting that up. I mean, you've got to know, there's that Clint Eastwood saying, a man's got to know his limitations. I'm not doing that. I talk to a company and say, we're doing this. Can you do this? They go, yes. They quote me, or we'll do a deal. They'll get there. I'll go, are you set? He goes, yes. And I'll walk away and leave it.
Right.
There's areas where you just have to spend money, and there's areas where you try to do it yourself. And that's the downside to being a smaller event, is you do a lot of it yourself because you have to. Whereas the bigger you get, you're getting sponsorship money. That's where that money's going. You're paying companies to do bits and pieces for you so that everything does go right. You have a tech company on board to handle all of the technical requirements to make sure, particularly when you're doing virtual panels, that everybody's streaming in, that the stuff on our end is working fine. You have a security company to make sure all the little holes are plugged. You have staff to handle certain other areas. There's always bits and pieces that you can delegate. Now, you can do them yourself. You can get your own equipment. You can do your own tech, but sometimes with the venues, you can't. The same thing with advertising. Like, we have a company that does a bulk of our advertising, whereas I used to do a lot of it myself, and now I tend to deal with one big company. And that saved us a lot of time, and it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we're doing things. But when you're smaller or starting out, you have to do that yourself. You go around putting up your own posters. You go into stores and pin stuff up. You post stuff on Facebook yourself. There's different levels of things, and there's stuff that we're definitely doing, but there's also a lot of stuff that's delegated out.
Makes sense. How do you?
Anyway, it works.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it gets better and better as you do it. So.
How do you stay up with everything, though? Because you must have to stay up with the trends with everything in regards to...
I watch a lot of shows.
But like,
one of the things about COVID that I haven't hated this year is that normally September, October, there's so many shows are out that it's hard for me to keep up with them. And this year, that's not been the case because a lot of them starting in January. So I've only had a lot of the streaming stuff that's popped up. So I've had much more time to catch up and chew through things. I've still got to get around to watching Handmaid's Tale is on my list that I've got to get to shortly. But there's so many new quality shows that are popping up. But I tend to watch, if it's sci-fi, fantasy, superhero, I'm watching it.
Right. But that still requires a lot of time, and then that's still excluding.
Yeah, but that's hardly work. I mean, I do that anyway. I mean, I was just watching a Doctor Who and the Faceless Ones, which was a black and white 1960, I'm going to say 68 show that they missed. There's 4 episodes out of the 6 are missing, so they animated it. So I got the Blu-ray and just finished watching that. So. I don't tend to watch a lot of DVDs and Blu-rays anymore. I think a lot of people aren't really. It's more streaming. So, but yeah, I mean it's work, but I'm not the only one. Staff are sort of doing that kind of thing, and it's research. It's keeping on to it. It's watching what's online. I mean, it's all part of it. But I also have more and more been delegating the social stuff and the some of those things to other people, and then there's people who step into, new shows that started, and I get people reaching out to me saying, "Oh, would you like this person for a show?" And if I know what the show is, that helps, and if I don't, I can find out. But generally, if I don't know what it is, then it's not something that is mainstream enough for people to want to care about.
Right. So when it comes to shows, you're like the big cheese, and then you might delegate other stuff to gaming.
There's shows and there's shows. Like I don't watch. There's certain shows that are just not. I'm not the age group for. Like Riverdale and the new Charmed, and there's a bunch that sort of fit into that. Like the Sabrina show, I actually watched because I enjoy the hell out of that one. But a lot of the stuff, I have to be in my 20s to really enjoy it. But I have staff to do that. So I mean, and they're probably watching it anyway. And again, it's. That's where it helps to sort of read social and see what other people are doing too. So,
yeah. Because I imagine you can't keep on top of everything. It would be impossible to try.
All of that stuff. It's also, if I'm not, I mean, I'll watch an episode or so. Like I've only watched one episode of Vampire Diaries, and it didn't appeal to me. So, and there's like 8 seasons and a spin-off show. But we just had 2 of the main stars virtually appear. I knew they were going to be popular, so it was nice to do. But, I mean, I can keep on to it without actually watching the show myself.
Yeah. But I guess the main thing is you do delegate when you need to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's also, as I said, again, I'm at that age where some stuff I can get into and other stuff is just not, I'm not the core audience for it. I'm not going to sit through it.
Yeah. Well, that's fair enough. Well, listen, I'll wrap up there. But I just want to say that I really admire what you've done with the whole Armageddon thing for the decades and decades that you've been doing it.
Yeah, don't say like that.
And I mean, I look forward to seeing how it goes in the future. You've got a good thing going, and as much as there are dickheads around on social media, I know a lot of people that appreciate it.
Yeah, so do I. And then that's the stuff that gets going. But the problem with the internet is 99 people say good things, one person says bad things, the bad thing's the one you read, or the one that you remember more. So it's, but more and more I'm just stepping away from that because it's just, it gets too consuming. And I have found, though, that it's like if somebody insults you in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, it didn't happen. So, if people comment on stuff and I don't read it, it doesn't matter because realistically they're talking to themselves. So anyway, but look, I'm looking forward to next year. I mean, I'm very happy with how this year went, and we're looking to see what happens for this coming year. So it's certainly was that. I don't know if it's an actually Chinese saying, but there's a "May you live in interesting times." Certainly, we are living in interesting times.
We definitely are. One for the history books, to be sure.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So if anyone wants to follow the Armageddon Expo on social media, where's the best place for them to do it?
Type in Armageddon Expo and you'll find us. I mean, we're not, that's the thing is we're pretty easy to find. So that's why we stopped promoting our website and stuff because it's just not hard to get hold of anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Do you attend all the days? Every single expo? Yeah. Are you there every single day?
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
The only show that of all of the years that we've done shows, this year's Wellington, I had to duck out early because we had a family emergency and I had to head home. But every other show that we've done over the 25 years, I've attended them all.
It's amazing, and I respect your work ethic. I really, really do.
Now, a lot of the times it doesn't feel like work. I mean, but that can be part of the problem is that it is work. It just, but anyway, thank you. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.
I will look forward to hearing this in the future.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that's the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe, and follow the Armageddon Expo for all the updates. Stay safe.